Today, I talked to author Daniel White about his debut novella, White Mice. It's part horror, part dystopian thriller, part very difficult to classify, which we get into much depth about in the course of this interview. And I highly recommend you check it out. I'll put all the links to Daniel's stuff down below. But because I'm known to put my money where my mouth is, I'm going to buy one person out there, might be you watching this right now, a free copy of the ebook of White Mice. All you have to do is comment down below, what is the video game that inspired Daniel most in regards to his writing of White Mice? The first person to comment down below will win a ebook copy from Amazon of White Mice. But I hope you enjoy this interview with Daniel. We talk about the craft of writing, inspiration, world building, fantasy, horror, all kinds of things. So I highly encourage you to watch until the very end because there's a little bit of a surprise for you guys out there. And dare I say, might this be a world exclusive reveal? So with that said, I hope you enjoy this interview with Daniel White. Hey, Dan. Well, thanks for taking the time to sit down with me and talk about your new book, White Mice. How's it going?
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, thanks for having me on. And yeah, really excited to get into it.
So you emailed me asking if I'd be interested in checking this thing out, and I was immediately drawn, being a sucker for dark, bleak stuff, post-apocalyptic kind of stuff, and also the fact that it was short. I was really excited to check it out, and I actually read it twice because I read it a little while ago and then read it again just to prepare for this chat we were having. But I write as well, so I'm always curious to ask this question: out of all of the mediums for storytelling, why writing? What drew you to writing?
Essentially, it's a really good question. I've basically been writing pretty much like my whole life. Never really amounted to anything necessarily, but I do enjoy the sort of the whole sort of writing process. Really, the idea of sort of storytelling. It's just always been something that I've always done. I have tried other forms of sort of media as well. I used to make YouTube videos back in 2012 when I was a teenager, and sort of on and off sort of thing, Twitch streaming, all that sort of stuff. When I was younger, I was sort of taking out the little camcorder and making little movies. And, a lot of the time it wasn't necessarily writing a script. It was just sort of going just off my own head, and just sort of seeing where it ended up, and then hopefully I can fix it all in post. Yeah, so I've tried all sort of forms of media. Even done a bit of sort of game design, although not overly heavily sort of story heavy. But even if it's telling a simple story, on the level of sort of like sort of Crash Bandicoot and Mario, which doesn't really have a story, but any sort of time I can tell a story, I really enjoyed it. And it was only essentially what draws me to the storytelling is more the world building. Always been obsessed with fictional worlds, and when I watch, like, for example, the Star Wars prequels, I was not drawn to the storytelling because they're not really known for that. It was the world building that I really loved. The different planets, the sort of background stuff that's going on. That really interests me. The different species that arise from the environment that they're in. That's always really drawn me. So when it came to something like White Mice, it's basically a universe I've been developing for probably about a decade. So it's been a long project. Essentially, the way I go about it is developing the world. That's what I love doing, is creating. There's about an 80-year or so history that's behind White Mice. So the lore is very deep. And same with another fictional universe that I'm working on as well. And then essentially it's drawing the story from that fictional world. And sort of, I don't know where it's going to go. Basically, when I start writing, I just know that I have the world in my head and it sort of comes from that. So, I'd say, yeah.
No, great answer. So speaking of that, so White Mice, it's a shorter, I think you said it's around 11,000 words. So novella.
About that, yeah.
Long short story, something like that. So I'm just curious, considering how long you've been working on this thing, it's been like living in your mind for, like you said, a decade or more.
Yeah.
What drew you to tell such a short story? Because that's the biggest thing I got out of this, is like, I love the world. It honestly, and we'll talk about this a little bit later as well, but it felt to me like So I love video games too. I love horror video games. And it really gave me that feeling of progressing through a video game in a good way, in the best way, where you don't quite know what's going on, even though the story is told in first person. But I'm just really curious, going back, why such a short story if this thing's been living in your head for so long? Do you have other plans to expand it later, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great question because it was obviously, as you can imagine, that was quite a big, it wasn't something that was done lightly. And I never actually went into it for it to be a short story. That wasn't actually the original goal. The original goal was, 60,000 or so novel. So I started writing it once again, probably around about 8 years ago, something like that, in this universe. No, it wasn't like I was writing one word a day for 8 years to get it to the point that it got to. It was more of I basically started writing it, and basically I mean, you're a writer. Sometimes with works, you can dip in it, leave it for a few months. You come back out of it, you go back into it again. Sometimes that gap can be even years, which it was in this case. I'm pretty sure, some of Stephen King's works, were sort of like 7-year long, projects of his. I especially know that's true of Pet Sematary. That was one that you sort of shelved for quite a while and then went back to it. But the thing is, when I went back into writing it again, I read through it. And the thing was, I knew that it being a full-length novel would probably, generate more revenue. It'd probably be more marketable to people, and it almost feel better for it to be like a completed novel. The problem was where the story was and where I sort of felt it had to go. I just had to follow the story, and I sort of had to have that conversation with myself of like, look, I could try to flesh it out and push it further than it needs to go. But for the story and what I decided that the actual theme and the message I wanted to get across, it just had to end there. That's just where the story ended for me. Which might sound, maybe you're a bit confused. Maybe you might think after reading it that it was quite an abrupt ending, and that maybe it almost seems like it was a deliberate choice to sort of go, nope, it's finished now, cut it off. But that's sort of kind of the message that I wanted to get across, that it's supposed to be an abrupt ending. It was by design, and I honestly, 1807's story did end there, and we can get into more of that later as to why and the sort of thematic beats that it's trying to hit. And also, you learn a lot from small projects. I definitely know this is true of, as soon as it's my first work, and I'm quite a young new author. You learn a lot from doing a small project, and you learn a lot by completing a project. That was the thing. I've been writing for my whole life on and off, but to actually have something that's out there and finished, it actually gives you that little boost of motivation to say, you know what, you've actually done this. You're not an aspiring author. You're an author now. You've actually put something out there that people are consuming. And to me, that was actually a massive motivational boost. So there's many factors that go into it, but definitely don't be afraid to start small, I think. And, when it comes to game design, the biggest advice I can, talking on like a similar creative industry, is make small games, make tiny games, get it finished. Because, once you write it, half the time's editing. You've got to now go back through this draft and try and find a story from that. And most people, I suppose, maybe don't experience that, especially new authors, experience the editing process and the actual finalizing it and putting a bow around it. And, not to mention the fact that as an artist or a creative person, I don't think you ever think your work's done. You can always add to it, and you'll be stuck in a decade-long stretch of trying to finish it and trying to make it perfect, and to the point where the original story sort of goes. So at some point you've got to go, nope, that's done. Stick to it. Move on to the next thing, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's a famous saying. I can't remember who said it, but it's art is never finished; it's abandoned, basically, at some point, or more or less.
That's true.
Meaning, yeah, I totally agree with you. Is that I tend to be a perfectionist, probably to a fault, in terms of just the beat by beat prose and everything. But I 100% agree with you. Start small. I regret not starting small. Granted, I very much like you wrote a lot of short stuff as a kid and through high school and all that, and didn't really sit down write something until I was probably in my 30s. But it's a different beast, and I think I always stress to people to start small because for me, so many books I read, the construction of the scene. So the scene is one of the smaller units of story that I think people need to master. And the best way to do that is with short stories. Because you could have a short story that's strictly one scene long. And if you can't write a scene successfully, I argue you shouldn't probably be writing a novel, because that's all a novel is. It's a sequence of scenes. And so I always, whereas, all of us, I mean, I think, because I grew up on fantasy and sci-fi and horror and all that. So I think many people, especially new writers, I find, want to tackle an epic project. Like I have this endless fantasy series. Every volume is 1,000 pages. And it's like, okay, I appreciate the ambition, but like, slow down, because I think there's more to writing than you may think. And it's important to get the fundamentals down. But yeah, no, I love that answer, and I think that's great advice too. But before we get too far into all that stuff, let's talk about I probably should have asked this sooner, but why don't you let everybody know what the hell is White Mice? Like, what's it about? Granted, I don't want to get into too many spoilers in this chat because I want people to read it, but just, I guess, what's the elevator pitch for White Mice?
I always struggle with the elevator pitch. So essentially, you follow a character named 1-807, which is obviously straight off the bat very dehumanizing. And he is a character who's brought up, born and bred in a place called Zegot Testing Facilities. Now, you don't really know too much about this, about the facility, even what year it is or anything. It's told through the first person present, so you're right there with the main character the entire time. And it's basically about his journey through being a test subject in Zegot Testing Facilities, which has, many other guests staying there. Some who are born and bred there, some who arrive as criminals, as hinted in the book, and basically follow through the horrors that go on inside Zegot Testing Facilities, and what's it all about. To be honest, it's less. Even though, as I said earlier, that I'm very much a lore man. I like building up fictional universes. It's actually not very sort of science heavy, or necessarily about Zegot Testing Facilities. I think it's more about sort of kind of who we are as a person. This is a person who's been systemically imprisoned, and is basically used to this sort of industrial routine of things. So even a person like that can still have some kind of humanity to them, even if they have no grasp or anything outside of that. And it wasn't necessarily something that I sort of thought about writing. Like, I'm going to go and write about this, these kind of philosophical ideas. But it ended up being that, following through this main character who is mute as well, which I'm sure you'd want to touch on at some point. And how being a mute in the modern days, difficult enough. You don't have a voice, and it's even harder when you're in a place like this that's continuously oppressing you, and not just that, the other inmates also oppressing you. We're still humans. We still want that connection and that sort of belonging, and whether they find it or not is, well, I suppose read it to find out. But I suppose one of the big things that I would take away is that, we'll get into that later. Actually, yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll get into that a bit later.
Yeah, I guess you brought up the thing where the protagonist is mute. What was your thoughts behind that? Because I really like that touch.
Essentially, I don't want to say it was just for the creepiness factor, because that's such an easy sort of get out. But it is that sense of the fact that the only person. Well, this is the thing that I said we'd talk about later, but we've nicely sort of transitioned into it. Essentially, the reader, and 1807 doesn't know this, but you're basically the only person that's ever understood this character, and this character that you're reading is never going to know that. that somebody's actually listening, and as you're reading it, you actually care for this character and you want something good to happen to them. You want them to, live their best life and everything, and you don't want them to be tortured or anything. But and they don't know that there's actually somebody reading and wanting this of them, and it's quite tragic in a way because 1807 doesn't have that. Can't communicate his thoughts, or he's trapped in this facility, but also trapped in his own mind. And the only person that can ever, realize that is the reader, the reader, which I hope comes across as a more intimate connection to the character themselves, even though, by all rights, they shouldn't really be that of an interesting character. They've been institutionalized in a very mundane facility where horrible things happen. Yet they're still a person, and you still care about them, even though they don't have grand adventures, they don't have necessarily happy memories or anything like that, or but they may have something philosophical to share, some kind of message for the world, even though they can't articulate it. And hopefully, you as the reader feel that connection with them.
Yeah, I like that. There's a moment in the book too where I'm just paraphrasing, but he thinks that he has a choice at one moment in the story, and it's written on the page. And I thought that was an interesting commentary, because I feel like when you are seeing his day to day, the people he encounters, the stuff he's accustomed to, you almost feel like he's just programmed to go like kind of beat by beat. But there is a moment of this agency, I guess, or free will, if you want to call it, at some point, that he has a revelation of sorts. And I thought that was really cool and subtle. And I think subtlety is, again, one of my favorite things about the story. Is you mentioned you spent so much time building this world, all of the stuff. And I feel like so many writers out there, when they create these amazing, detailed worlds, they want to share it ad nauseum. You didn't do that in this story whatsoever. Granted, it's shorter too, and it feels like this moment in time. But I guess what was your approach with world building, or teasing out what the world is without getting heavily into exposition? Because I feel like, because the story is told in first person, you could have had this character just rattle off about his day to day and what is what and all this stuff. So I guess what drove your decision to make the world building kind of subtle in this regard versus, educating the reader?
Yeah, so I suppose it comes from a sort of philosophy. I don't like to treat the reader as an idiot, like they need everything explained to them. I really hate that in storytelling, whether it's a movie, a book, whatever it is, a game. If people are smart. We live our lives by stories, and I suppose it's the cliche show don't tell, but sort of taken to the next extreme, in the sense that I think most people who read it will understand pretty much what's going on. And I don't think everything needs to be spelled out to them, and leaving little subtle hints. As somebody who myself absolutely loves getting into the nitty gritty of lore, mainly video games and stuff, but even really niche communities and things like that, like the 40k universe, for example, the amount of books, games, everything, you can really get in depth with the lore of it. And I love it. I absolutely love it. No matter what it is you're consuming, when you notice that tiny little detail that it's not in your face, it might just be in the background. It might be one comment that a character says. And I love that you can take that, and then you as the reader can sort of sit back and think, think about it. You come up with your own theories. It's why I think a lot of the biggest fandoms, online or message boards or, wherever, tend to be really successful when the community sort of engaged in that. Oh, but this little thing that this person said early on actually might link to this thing, and all the sort of just letting people work through it themselves. And I think that's really fun, and I don't want to deprive the reader of that. And it comes back to my whole actual writing process, really, is that I built this world, whether it's my fantasy world that I'm working on, or whether it's in White Mice in Zega testing facilities, is that I've built this world, and essentially all I do is I have the character. All I know about the character is their background. That's all I know. And essentially I just put this character in the situation with that background, and I just write it. I know the universe. I know how people would react in that universe. I know the lore and the history and stuff in my head. So I don't know. I didn't know what 1807 was going to be like until I started writing him. I didn't even know his gender. I think it's only mentioned once in the book, actually. Originally, it was supposed to be sort of ambiguous, that you never really know, just to dehumanize them even further. But in the end, yeah, I went with that they're a male. Basically, yeah, I had no idea what this character was going to be like, how deep they were actually going to think. I didn't know what they were going to do, essentially where they were going to go. And yeah, I didn't really ultimately know what was going to happen to them until I was writing, until it felt right in that moment in the story. So I definitely have a deep connection with the characters when I'm writing them, because I'm sort of going along for the journey with them. I think you mentioned in a previous video before about how, you put yourself in the characters' shoes and you see it from their eyes and you make a decision as if you're that character. It's sort of like that, but just really playing off the world that they're actually in. And given 1807's background, how would they react to seeing a dead body? I suppose in their case, they see it all the time. People are expendable. So they're not going to react with shock and horror. They're used to it. So yeah, really getting inside the characters' heads. Yeah.
I mean, that's really, again, maybe that's why I was so drawn to it as well, is that, like you mentioned, I've tried so often to plot things in detail and create these massive outlines, and it's just, it always kind of failed to attract me to the story. And so now my process is pretty much like yours, where I know the character, I know there's rough beats in the story that I'm trying to hit, but I want to see what happens when I'm down there on the ground floor with this character and as they're experiencing stuff. There was a great quote. I recently watched a short clip interview with George R. R. Martin, and he was talking about how he never outlined. He never planned what was going to happen, because but then when he came to Hollywood and they were forcing him to write outlines for scripts just so they could say, like, well, show us what this is, like, generally speaking. He didn't like it because he found that once he went to go write the prose, or in the case the script, he felt like he'd already told the story. And I thought that was such a great articulation of why it's unappealing to some people, is because when you're spending so much time writing an outline, you're living beat by beat this entire story, kind of more like from a 30,000-foot view. And then now you got to write the prose, and you're like, well, it's less exciting for me because I know what's going to happen more or less, or I've experienced these emotional or plot beats. And so I all of these, it's a long way of me saying that a lot of these writers that they've kind of helped validate what works for me now. And it sounds like you're of a similar thing. I know Dean Koontz is the same way. Like he does an outline, he'll just sit down and it might take him like a day to do one page. And this is like a 14-hour day. So it's really cool that he's trying to get into that. But go ahead.
This is the thing. It's it's an art form, and I think it depends what you're trying to write for. If you're simply just trying to be almost like a career writer, then I guess do whatever works for you. But if you are just trying to, for me, it's an art form. If only 10 people end up reading my work, great. And if they're all critics, again, fine. As long as I've gotten that story out there and I enjoy the process of writing. So I'm not gonna. The end in The White Mice was as much a surprise to me as I think hopefully the reader.
It was surprising
because because it's because I don't know where the story's going to go, and I enjoy that. I like that. It's like it's letting your imagination run wild, almost in that sort of childish sense, of playing with your action figures, or your army men that you set up these elaborate battles for. It's it's a way of escapism, not necessarily a nice escapism in the terms of White Mice, but it is that sort of going into like a separate universe. And I just really enjoy that process. I think and I think you get the most organic story out of it because you're basically playing through what would happen in real life. And as you can probably tell from my work, I really love brutal reality, realism, not necessarily like anti-fantasy or anything like that, or mythical, but I just like that sort of stark, sort of brutal gut punch kind of, this is what probably would happen. And I hope that, as you know, when you were reading White Mice, you maybe sat back and thought, this is a future that could actually happen, and people could probably justify it pretty easily, actually. There are even historical examples. Some of the, for example, one of my, it probably a bit on the nose, but one of the sort of inspirations for the book was Unit 731 from Japan. If you're familiar with the,
is it a movie or a novel or manga or?
No, so it's a real historical event.
Oh,
so it was in World War II. So the Japanese had a camp called Unit 731, and this was where they did obviously live experimentations, vivisections on prisoners, either prisoners of war or captured prisoners, civilians as well. So obviously, looking into that and the sort of horrors that came out of that. I think if you know anything about Unit 731, you can probably see like it's quite an on the nose inspiration for White Mice. But again, that's something that happened. And to be honest with you, Unit 731 was probably worse than White Mice, and that's reality. So it's they would say fact is sort of stranger than fiction or more horrible than fiction. And I just really like that sort of bleak sort of outlook on on storytelling. I think. I think it can touch people a lot deeper than a lot of happier messages can. I think, because people. I'm trying to think of the quote that is it like most men live lives of quiet desperation, which I think a lot of people might sort of relate to in that sort of fiction.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely bleak. I love bleak stuff. So readers out there, be warned. If you want a happy ending or anything like that, this probably isn't for you. But have you ever read Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bastarrica? Or I
haven't, no.
So it's very reminiscent as well. I like what you're saying about how these things, this is a possible future. So the entire premise of that book, and a lot of people think it's pretty ridiculous, but I think that's kind of the point, is that we can no longer eat animals. So basically all animals have some kind of disease. And then now what we do to supplement that is we breed humans. So we breed humans to slaughter humans for food. And it really, to me, the entire commentary of that novel was how quickly humans can acclimate to terrible acts. And I think a lot of what you're saying with this book is a lot of people might think, this would never happen. This is terrible. They would never do this to people, et cetera, et cetera. But realistically, I mean, like you said, if you go back in history, back in time, you'll find plenty of instances where people did horrible things without blinking an eye. And and not only those select individuals or cultures, but how so many people turned a blind eye to it, or at the very least were brainwashed into thinking like this is just normalcy so quickly. And I think that's always been a fascinating topic to me, is how quickly people can adjust to horrible things. But
it's the thing, this, as I say, we're only 3 days away from barbarism, in the sense that if we ran out of food, it would probably only take 2 or 3 days for everyone to start killing each other for resources, or turn to cannibalism, or any other sort of and people justify anything. There's a lot of heavy subjects here, but it's a heavy book. Even just looking at an easy example of like the Holocaust. I mean, how anybody could justify that in their head, I mean, even just trying to imagine yourself as an officer or a prison guard or something in that situation, like you must have to really do some mental gymnastics to justify that you're on the right side of history. And that's the other terrible thing, I suppose, is that everyone thinks they're the good guy. No matter who, you can take any sort of dictator in history, any sort of evil person, any sort of murderer, any sort of serial killer, and they'll justify it to themselves, and they think they're right. Nobody thinks they're the evil one. It's the same. Yeah, it's the same in White Mice. It's when push comes to shove, I think people sort of show their true nature. And it's something I definitely want to touch on a lot more with future sequels as well. That sort of animalistic sort of, once people are pushed, what they'll be capable of, I think is sort of the core message.
So there will be more, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So after this one got published, after White Mice was published, a lot of the feedback I got was, where's the rest of it? Yeah. This feels like a prologue. This is, all positive feedback. If people want to read more, that's great. That's a great thing to have. But, and at the time I was working on my fantasy series, which is, again, like you said earlier, it's going to be a trilogy book. The entire story's all, mapped out from beginning to end across many years. And, the world building's very deep on it. And I'm probably about a third of the way through the first book. After getting the feedback from this book, though, I basically told myself, well, people like it, and they clearly want to see more of the sort of the deep lore, and they want to see more of ZTF and, more of the characters in the books. And I basically told myself, well, I wouldn't do it unless I came up with a story that I'm going to like. I'm not just going to write for the sake of it. It needs to be as a good a story, if not better. And I did about a month ago or so. It was one of those sort of brainstorming sessions where it just clicks in your head. That's perfect. That's exactly what I need to tell. It's the right perspective. It's the right story, the right ending. So this is one of those rare times, I suppose, where I have actually sort of mapped out roughly the ending, and not necessarily the middle, but the beginning and the end is sort of set in stone. But yeah, I'm already writing the next one, and I am aiming for this one to be a full novel release this time. So it's not going to be another short work. So yeah, this is the thing. Like, you've got to push yourself as well. I could easily sort of go into another short story, a novella. But no, I'm going to push myself to go for the full novel this time. So yeah, it's exciting. I'm happy with the sort of beta reader feedback I've got so far. It's only a couple of chapters in, but yeah. And if we got time at the end, I actually have a little passage that I would like to share of the new one. It's obviously a work in progress. Yeah. It's only about 400 words or so, but just to give you an idea of the sort of thing we're going for. But yeah, if we got time at the end, I'd love to go through that with you.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate the fact that because I'm of the same philosophy, is that a story is as long as it needs to be. And so I really like the fact that you weren't, because I've been guilty of it myself, but that you didn't feel like, I can't release this. No one's going to want to read a 30 some odd page story. They want a novel. And so you didn't artificially inflate it into something that it wasn't supposed to be. And I like that. I really like that, because I think that for me, I often have more powerful experiences with shorter work than longer works, personally.
Me too.
Novels and everything. Only because when you spend such a short time with a person or people or events, you tend to, I think, subconsciously try to make the story economical as well, where you're not like trying to really bloat it out. You're just trying to make it kind of just tight and what it needs to be. And again, that's what I got from your story, is that it did feel you were giving lots of nuggets that made me ask questions that I never got the answer to, which I love, right? So that's my favorite thing. It's very reminiscent of even playing like Dark Souls for the first time. You wake up, you're walking around, you see these crazy vistas and castles, and like, who is that guy sitting right there? What's his story, right? And so I love that, because I was having a conversation the other day about this exact thing, and that you just want to give enough to pique the interest, to ask the question, because then you want to constantly dangle this carrot in front of the reader. And I think you did that really well, because granted, you do answer some questions or things can be inferred, but there's so much left to the imagination, where it does feel like there's this sweeping history and world and all these events that have happened, but you don't quite give those away. So I really like that about the story. It's cool.
Yeah, and it's and I suppose those things weren't necessarily done because a few people have been frustrated with the fact that, like you say, the carrot was dangled and then taken. It's sort of there's a few payoffs that I suppose that might not always be sort of like you get the answer to, and that was by design, but not necessarily in a way to purposely frustrate the reader. It was, to be honest with you, it was almost a look into. I'm trying to sort of talk about it in terms of trying to do a bit of a spoiler-free kind of way of explaining it. In a way, now I like people to be able to look at a piece of media and not be told exactly, what the meaning behind it was. Or, the great thing about, like, say, a painting is that people can look at it and feel something different depending on, you might evoke different, reactions depending on who it is that's looking at the piece of art. And that goes the same for, with any form of media. But I do think if you wanted to sort of tie together the entire sort of story, it would be that it's almost a play on what it's like to have something like psychosis. So you as the reader, as you're reading this, you're picking up these little nuggets of truth, these little nuggets of like, what's this? Oh, there's a hint here. Oh, I think, and as you're reading it in your head, you're thinking, I wonder what, is there going to be a twist? I think this is what's behind it. Or I think that this is, maybe this person's behind this, or I think this is going to happen. And, you as a reader naturally just do that. So I suppose, as you read it and you get towards the middle and get towards the end, you sort of realize that actually, no, like psychosis, nothing's going on. There's no extra, there's no grand plot. And just like in life, there's not a big grand plot that, I love a conspiracy theory as much as the next person because they're just fun to read into. That's a form of sort of storytelling in itself. But but ultimately, there's no big, all these little things that you as a reader have been picking up. It's like, oh wait, that doesn't actually go anywhere, and that's sort of like a feeling as to what some kind of psychotic episode would look like. It's like, so it's sort of a storytelling within a storytelling. I don't know if that's necessarily made obvious at any point, but that's the sort of takeaway after rereading the work that I sort of take away from it. That the sort of deeper message, I suppose.
Was there any fear that would turn some people off?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And, it's like we've already said, I sort of just had to, I want to write and I want it to be my voice and I want it to be unique. And I really don't think that, honestly, I don't think White Mice is necessarily for everyone. And that sounds really almost quite silly for an author who's trying to, he's trying to get, build up an audience and everything to say. But I think there is a niche market. And, there's the saying of, if you try to write to everyone, you write to no one. And, I think that's so true that, even if a few % of the population would enjoy the book, then I'm happy with that. And even if it's a very small number, then I'm more than happy with that. What I suppose what I want to get across is that, as we've already said, like the sort of the bleakness, the realism, the sort of overarching themes of, what it might be like to sort of find a grand design in life and realize that it doesn't actually exist. That's what I want to get across. And I completely understand that's not for everybody. And I don't think a lot of the things, even when it comes to the sort of the violence and gore in the book, because as you probably see on, the sort of blurb on Amazon, there's a lot of content advisories on there, violence, cannibalism, things like that, warnings before you even get into it. And maybe that'll draw some people in, but it's for a very niche. And when it comes to those sort of violent themes, it's never meant to be a sort of gore fest. It's not supposed to be like a slasher horror. That's not what it was never intended to be like that. And a lot of the way that 1807 actually describes the events is almost clinical. It's very, because again, that's all they've known. So, they're not necessarily disgusted by it. And when they, let's say, maybe perform some experiments of their own, it's sort of almost done for a scientific lens. It's the things that are described are, very, very clinical, very dry. Not necessarily it's not meant to be a bloody sort of Saw movie kind of book. And I hope that sort of came across as well when you were reading it.
100%. I think that's the thing is like, I I'm typically drawn to more niche stuff, like with film or stories and all that. And so I'm often critical of a lot of more mainstream books that I'll pick up, or popular books, just to try. And you just see, like, you can see them trying to, like you said, make a book for everybody, right? Versus they're doing all the safe stuff. It's not that interesting. Like, honestly, it'd be, and maybe you can tell me this, but I can't imagine trying to classify this thing on Amazon, because it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't fit into like splatterpunk horror. It's not like a Saw thing. Yes, it's horrific, but it's kind of post-apocalyptic. I mean, like, did you have a difficult time figuring out categories and all that?
Definitely. And, like I say, with, thinking about the marketability of the book, even when, as I say, like, oh, should it be a novel because it will sell more? If it is a novel, it's easier to market. When it comes to like actually categorizing what it is, this is the thing. Either I've completely missed the mark here, or I'm onto something, really good. So, I don't know, but categorizing it was really difficult, because I've always lent on horror. Horror is I'd say is like the main theme, but then, like you say, I try to leave a lot to the imagination. So when I'm describing things that are happening in the book to characters, the horrific things that are happening, it's usually sort of matter of fact. It doesn't go into great details and paragraphs about the things that are happening, because, like I say, readers aren't stupid. They can fill in the gaps in their head, and that wasn't for lack of like trying to be really descriptive and be poetic with anything. That's because I trust that the reader can, and that's not what it's about. It's I can trust that the reader can actually fill the gaps themselves. Sometimes you do need a good description of things that are going on to build that sort of vivid imagery. But when it comes to like the sort of the gory stuff, I don't really think it's necessarily necessary. And I think if you are, then you're getting into that sort of slasher body horror sort of thing. So I suppose, I'd say horror, body horror, and I don't want to sound too sort of pseudo philosophist, but I think quite philosophical in a way. I think it deals with a lot with identity and what it means to like be a person and be happy and be free. A lot of freedom obviously naturally it comes from it. So this is I've never really thought about it too much, but I'm just thinking back to when I was publishing it on Amazon, and I did struggle like trying to put it into the sort of categories, because it's dystopian horror, body horror. I suppose you could even call it a thriller if you drop some of the more sort of extreme themes. But that's a really good. I never really thought about it like that. But it's hard to sort of put it into its, which maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's a good thing.
I personally think it's a great thing. I just understand that sometimes when people, is it like this? What is it like? Is it when you're trying to sell somebody to read something, they like to have a reference point so they can compare it to something. And it's granted, I could probably come up with a few like that evoke the same sense in me, but they're, it's like, I don't know if that would be the best way to sell it either. It's
I would say it's probably the closest thing I would say. I'd probably say it's my favorite work ever is I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. I'd probably say that's the closest, I think. I don't know if that was sort of the thing you were thinking of as well, but that's probably, short story, and it has the same sort of bleak atmosphere, same. That's probably the closest I'd say to it. Maybe 1984, but very loosely.
I guess aesthetically, let's say, it feels a lot like 1984 aesthetically, especially the film. I don't know if you've seen the film as well, but it has that just bleak kind of urban people, again, like mice and like lab rats, basically, just kind of eking out a terrible existence. But I often like visually kind of went to that, not necessarily like thematically, like not an authoritarian kind of regime, but like just the feeling of being there, like with Winston, with the gray walls and all that stuff, like that. That really came to mind when I was reading this.
See the institutionalization of it. I think, exactly. Definitely. Yeah.
And if people out there watching or listening couldn't tell that, I mean, the title "White Mice" is pretty indicative of what these people are kind of dealing with, or at least the context in which we might view them, metaphorically. So, but yeah, that's really cool. I want to talk briefly too about video games. So I noticed on your site you mentioned it a few times here, like you have some backgrounds in video game design and so on and so forth. I'm just curious. How much of that influenced this story? And if so, which games would you say did the most?
That's a brilliant question, because video games have pretty much always been a part of my life. So when it comes to like storytelling and the world building, there are a lot of things that I take inspiration from. I suppose to start with sort of my own journey with like game development. So like I'm currently working on I'm currently working on an indie game. It's a platformer, sort of similar to like, if you ever played the original Rayman back in the 90s, the sort of 2D side scroller kind of thing. So that's very upbeat, very, very happy. It's called Luke of the Chickens. You play as a chicken attacking slime monsters. So it's just a basic, it's a platformer, not a great deal of story that goes into it.
None of this sounds like something you'd be working on, right? based on this story. It's very surprising.
Absolutely not. No, it's I mean that's sort of my more recent sort of go at video game design, because again I started with RPGs, so that sort of storytelling through role playing. So back in the day, using things like RPG Maker, before I moved to Unreal Engine, I was using like RPG Maker, which I think a lot of people start with, Game Studio and things like that. So I was making RPGs, and one of the RPGs that I began to make, never finished, was actually a White Mice one. So some of the actual story beats that you see in, or a lot of the world building, I should say, that you sort of see in White Mice do come from the unfinished, unreleased RPG that I made. And it was a really good like medium, because you mentioned, and I'd never made the connection until now, but as you're reading White Mice, it sort of feels like you're playing a video game. And when I actually went through back recently and replayed the old RPG that I made, set in, say, ZTF, and it's an eerily similar story that you're playing, playing as a character, but it's an RPG setting, but still following that sort of escape kind of literal rat race, literal like mouse maze, that you're trying to escape. So I suppose that was a big inspiration. I never made that connection before. But yeah, so that's sort of my personal journey with sort of video game development. Now, when it comes to, say, video games that maybe inspired me for something like White Mice, there's one that really, really stands out. And it's probably one of my favorite game series ever. Did you ever play Oddworld?
Oh, yeah.
So Oddworld is on PS1. Yeah. So you can probably see now, if if you're picturing Oddworld.
Oh yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, the exact similarities.
I didn't put two together. Yeah, I played all of them. Yeah, even the Abe's Odyssey one that came out in on 360.
Oh, the new and tasty.
Yeah.
Well, great.
Actually, it's funny that you mentioned this. So where I live in California was where the development team was before I lived here.
Oh, no way.
So Oddworld Inhabitants. Yeah, they used to have a once it closed up, you could walk downtown and see the entrance to the building, because it was just like this little doorway that went down underground, and it just had the logo on there. And yeah, it was kind of a random place.
That's amazing.
To be. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Oh, that's yeah. I mean, like Lord what's his name? Is it Lord Lanning? I think it's the Lord Lanning.
Something like that.
Oh, I'd absolutely love to speak to him about because. But the lore that sort of got into Oddworld, and that's the thing, because even though it was quite a big game series, a lot of the lore and stuff is really, really niche. Like the community is absolutely tiny, and there's a lot of sort of almost like unreleased sort of artwork and what they call concept art and things like that. That the community for decades has been trying to scramble together to try and figure out like what this, you know, who are the Magog cartel and who are these species in Oddworld, and you know, Mudos, the planet, you know, how big is it, and you know, all little things like that, you know, and they really get into like the fauna and the flora of the planet, and you know, I absolutely love that sort of world building. And when you're playing Oddworld, it feels like a world that's lived in, you know, it does feel like you're a fly on the wall in this world, and I just love the creativity of it. You know, there's no humans in it. It's not even set on Earth. It's completely separate. The character designs are brilliant, and so you know, and they recently remade. I think they called it Oddworld New and Tasty. I think it was Just Add Water, the studio, made it in Unreal Engine and remade the first Abe's Odyssey.
Oh, I didn't even know about that.
You know, pretty much like for like. So it's sort of 2.5D, so it's 3D, but you know, still playing left to right. And the thing is, even though it still had that sort of creepy tone to it, it just didn't match that sort of early 3D animation sort of pre-rendered thing that the PS1 had going on. You know, that old sort of pixelated, sort of dark, and you know, you go into a room there and there's like this sort of like blood stain on the wall that you can barely see, and you know, there's maybe like some graffiti on there saying, you know, run or something like that. You know, that really dark atmosphere, and I absolutely I'm so drawn to that. You know, and so Oddworld was a massive, and even just the story of Oddworld, I mean, you know, is heavily inspired for me. I think the one on the Xbox, I think it was Munch's Odyssey, basically deals with the
that's right
Munch's Odyssey. That's it. Yeah,
the last,
and that's and if you rewatch the cutscenes of that and then thought about White Mice, yeah, there's a lot of inspiration from there. But you know, it's drawing from childhoods. You know, childhood loves the fiction. You know, so
well, now that you mention it, I'm like, yeah, totally. 100%. Like just the dystopian kind of weird industrialized feeling of those games. Yeah, crazy. That's fun.
And that's a game series as well, which I think you could maybe call it diesel punk, but I think that's a hard one to shelve. That's a hard one to put into a unique category. Is it like a thriller? Is it? I mean, obviously, it's, you know, moving aside the sort of like it's a platformer, but in terms of like thematically where it sits, that's a tough one to try and.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, you know, that's why they did well in the early days, but they had to shut things down because I think even though it's widely regarded as a great series, it's one of those things, like you said, it's tough to sell. It's tough to like what are you comparing it to when you're trying to get funding, and it's X meets X. It's like, no, it's its own thing. And
yeah, exactly.
It's too bad because I feel like I know I remember reading interviews, just thinking about where he went and what happened, and I think they were trying to do a film at one point, like a full 3D film, and yeah, like you said, there's so much lore to it that unfortunately they didn't get to release it in its full. But that's funny. I was totally makes sense now that you mention it. I guess I was assuming it would be more like a horror game, like something like God, what's that game? I love it. It's where you're investigating like an abandoned mental facility. Outlast.
Oh, Outlast. Yes, Outlast. Yeah, Outlast. Yeah.
I love the first one. The second one was decent, but the first one for me was like so good.
Yeah. I only played the first one when it first came out. But, that was really good. Obviously, I'm a massive fan of abandoned asylums and things. Yeah, funny enough, actually, when I write White Mice, actually, or when I do any sort of writing, I don't know whether this is like a writer's thing or whether it's just a me thing. I'm assuming every sort of writer does it, but say I sit down to write White Mice, I would usually put my headphones on and I'd go and listen to some sort of asylum music or some really creepy atmosphere, sort of like just an ambience, you know, of really eerie sort of undertones. Yeah. And when I'm writing my fantasy novel, depending on which culture it is I'm writing at the time, so there's a race who are called the Vulcans. So they're a lot more sort of tribal. I suppose the closest you could sort of, there's almost sort of like a Norse sort of, Viking-y sort of aesthetic to them. Mm-hmm. You know, I'd put on some Viking war music in the background, just to really get myself into the, into the writing. I don't know if that's something you experience as well, whether you do that to try and.
I always have music on. I'm obsessed with these like long like hour long plus long things on YouTube where it's like Silent Hill ambience or whatever. And
yeah, exactly.
I'll send you. I don't know if you ever heard of the channel, but they're called Universal Ambience, and I found that to be beneficial because they're all themed around times and locations specific around the world, and so it's still kind of ambient, but they have like the flavor of the period. Like for instance, I was reading Lonesome Dove recently, and I would listen to it would be like Colorado 1854. And it's like an hour long. It's not obtrusive, right? It's not like a crazy Western music going on like a soundtrack, but it has the flavor of that time. And so, yeah, I totally always, I don't ever write without music. No lyrics, of course.
It's stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No lyrics. It's basically just to set the tone. I've never tried it with reading though. I might do that actually. Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the book and the music and all that. But yeah, I'd love to have some kind of eerie ambience going on especially if it's like horror or something like that. But,
yeah.
So I'm curious. I know you're working on a different game. Is there any plans in the future of adapting White Mice as this novella into something like even something as simple as like a walking simulator where someone can, like Dear Esther or The Vanishing of Ethan Carter. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those games, but where it's like it's interaction light, but it's story heavy. Have you ever thought about maybe adapting this to a shorter experience? Because I know Steam, for instance, there's an amazing opportunities there for these kind of off the wall niche games to kind of take off and have an audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's exactly like I said with my writing. The reason I've been starting developing a platformer is to try and get the basics of actual game design down, the artwork, and actually have a finished product, to actually get out there. And hopefully everything I learn, I love RPGs. I love the storytelling in video games, especially when your choices matter and have a consequence. And I think the world of White Mice is absolutely perfect for that sort of, the little decisions that you didn't think were big coming back to bite you later on, or, so yeah, absolutely. I don't really have a limit to, the thing is, I've been building the universe, the world of like White Mice for so long that I feel like it'd be a waste not to try and tap into all of it. So, at the moment, White Mice is out there and, it is a finished product. And people are enjoying it. And the next step I feel is to move on to a novel and tackle that. Obviously, at the same time, I think it's the thing with a lot of creatives. You have so many different things going on at the same time in different mediums. And try and get my my platformer out there and finished. But yeah, absolutely, an RPG set in or a walking simulator even, which is actually not a bad. It's actually not a bad step. I never thought about that because I don't know if you've ever played a beginner's guide. It was quite big quite a few years ago on Steam. That's like a walking simulator, but it's obviously very story heavy, and it sort of touches on things like depression and things, but through the eyes of the game character. But yeah, I think that would be really good. Especially if I could develop it in VR as well, I think that'd be quite terrifying.
Oh, yeah, it would be.
But yeah.
No, I love the idea. Yeah, I just feel I could imagine this being a game and almost just like exactly as the short story is, right? You have an experience that maybe is just an hour or two at most, but again, all these little visual Easter eggs that you kind of planted with prose and the story, like these things where they just beg the question, like what is that thing? Like what is the story of that thing? I think
is though, if I were to do it though, I don't think I could probably take it as it is as a sort of White Mice like. I probably couldn't do almost the same thing twice, but just in a video game form. I see. It would have to be like a complete flip on the head. So again, might not be very marketable, but it would be something like let's see off the top of my head, like an RTS game. Where you command armies from the top down, but your soldiers would be test subjects that you're thrown into battle waves after wave. Something that would flip a genre sort of on its head and make you feel like, am I the bad guy in this? Sort of, because I absolutely, I love the grey area. There's no, I don't think you'll ever find in White Mice or in any of my future works that there'll be a clear good guy and a bad guy. I don't. There's never going to be a good guy. There's never going to be a bad guy. You're just going to see the story from the perspective of one person. You might not like that person, or you may think they're wrong. But that's sort of. I'm firmly right in the middle of that grey area. So if it's a video game, I'd have to take advantage of that medium, and the fact that you're in control of the story would mean that I would have to get the player to do something morally grey and something that they would think, oh, should I really be doing this? But I do also want to beat the game at the same time, So in a similar way that I said, like, as you're reading it, you're sort of the only person that, cares about the character 1807. It's sort of, it's using the medium strengths to its strength, There's no other medium where you can really see the inner thoughts of, a person like you can with a book. You can kind of do it with movies, but it just doesn't work the same way. As you know, it's... Yeah. So I would have to use the medium to its best effect, I think. And same thing, if it's dreaming big, but if I ever had a short movie or something done in the universe, it would be it would really take advantage of the visuals. It would probably be all in black and white except for the blood or something. So something really striking like that. It would be. It'd have to really take advantage of the visuals. There would probably be little to no dialogue. It'd be a visual piece. I think you've got to work with the medium that you're working with and play to its strengths. I think that's
I couldn't agree more. I think that so many people are trying to make novels like films. Like, granted, I love visualizations and stuff, but I feel like some people take it too far, and they're not necessarily taking advantage of the medium itself. And one novel I read recently that had a film adaptation that was still a very good film, but the book just really demonstrates the what fiction can do that movies can, and that's We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver, I think her name is. But it's all told in letters she's writing to her husband, and it's about this. There was a school shooting, and it was her son, and who's to blame, essentially. And it's probably, if not the best example of what a novel or a written work can do that nothing else can. And I really wish more writers would think of it in that capacity. Is like, okay, well, what is this? Just like me writing what someone would be saying if they're watching a film, or do I have some missed opportunities here that I could really lean into? So
this is it, because White Mice, if you literally took White Mice story and just made it into a film exactly as it is, I think it would work, and it would be, it would be creepy, it would be scary, but I just don't think it would have the same. I just don't think you would go away with the same connection to the character as you would, obviously, in the novel at all. And the only way I suppose you could do that would be to have a continuous, ongoing, monologue playing over the top to hear everything they're doing, and it just wouldn't work. It'd get old pretty quickly. So, definitely, yeah. So, if it ever got made into something physical, it'd have to be a completely different story. But
I think those are all my questions regarding White Mice. Is there anything else that you'd like to kind of cover that maybe we didn't cover regarding the story or inspirations or anything like that?
Yeah. Just trying to think. I think, I suppose I have some questions for you, actually.
Oh, sure.
Sort of about, like, when you were reading it. So when you first started reading it, say for the first few pages, first few sort of paragraphs, by the time you got to the end of the book, did you feel did it surprise you in the sense that did it go in a completely different direction than you thought, or was it? I suppose what I'm trying to say is, do you think it was quite cliche, or do you think it sort of went in a direct? When you first started reading it, did it go in the direction you thought it was going to go into?
No.
I guess is one of my big questions.
I guess, like, you mean like how it ended, or do you mean just like the progression through the novel, like once it kind of got?
Not necessarily the ending, no. Okay. What sort of book you thought it would be, I suppose.
Man, I Well, I'm a very visual person, so I think the cover was really striking for me to convey a tone.
Mhm.
Plus, you have a lot of images on your website that are presumably from the novel or the story. But yeah, I mean, yes and no. Like I kept wondering, um, because again, I'm going to say it again, is that that's why what I like so much about it is that because it was told in such a way where you were experiencing this world through the character's eyes specifically. And like you said, it's not, you mentioned how, like, life doesn't have a plot, like life happens.
Mhm.
And that's what was interesting to me, in that, like, it was hard for me to understand what was going to happen. I mean, clearly you could tell they're in a facility of some kind. Clearly this title is called White Mice, so you understand sort of the thematic implications of it. But I I didn't know. I kept, because as readers, we're inherently looking for what's the story here. Like, what is
Mhm.
this leading up to, or what is happening, and I that constantly subverted my expectations too. And it's funny because often I critique stories for having no direction, but I think in this case it really worked, because
Right.
even
Okay.
though
Yeah.
they're, what, you know what I'm saying, because they're
Yeah. Yeah.
you even expressed, and again it's all about intent in a way, is that I wanted to just go through the day of this character, or a period of time with this character, and show you what that is like, without any kind of ideas around, oh, I got to have this midpoint, I got to have this third act climax, I got to have all this stuff. To me it just felt like an experience, I guess, versus
Mhm.
a and I think again that's why the shorter nature of it worked really well too, because I could imagine that, perhaps with a kind of, quote unquote directionless narrative, something that would be really long might be kind of tedious to a degree.
Mhm.
And but because it was so tight and short, I was never bored or anything. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I try to keep my, where I think a story is going to go, my expectations tempered, because I know a lot of people when they're reading books, they try to figure it out. They're like, okay,
Mhm.
this is what I'm going to expect is going to happen. This is what I think this
Mhm.
character is. Um, you did add a lot of hints and stuff in that regard, as they're in a facility, they're being experimented on. What is the purpose? We don't quite know. Um, but yeah, I guess I was never, I don't think I was surprised in a way that the facility and what was going on was unexpected. But I will say that, like, the way the narrative unfolded was unexpected to me, because, as
Right.
a
Okay.
writer and a
Yeah.
reader, I'm constantly thinking, like, we try to predict what's going to happen because we're so hardwired for storytelling, that everybody,
Yes.
even
Yeah.
even people who aren't writers, right? Because it's just, as a
Mhm.
species, like, I always talk about, orally passing on the stories. These old cavemen, when we first
Yeah. Around the
discovered.
campfire. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, that's just how we are as a species. So I think, like, we're hardwired for it, and so we often try to predict what's going to happen. Um, and I felt like I was just in this. Have you ever seen the film Beyond the Black Rainbow?
I haven't. No.
Okay, I recommend you check it out, because that's another film that really, it felt like this story, because there's a weird facility, there's a girl who's being, experimented on, it seems like, anyway, but it's
Mhm.
just such a surreal, psychedelic, just deliberately paced, odd, visually too. It's visually insane. And you do get those little treats where you'll see something, you're like, what the hell is that? Who is that? What is that? And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
never explained, right? And so I got the same vibe here with the with your story. So um it I don't know. That's a really long answer in that
No. No. That's
saying,
good. Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't, I guess environmentally or atmospherically and thematically and all that, I could see what you're going for, but also um, where the story was going, I I had no damn idea. And I think, again, that goes back to your intent of telling the story not with any preconceived ideas of what's going to happen, essentially. Just like,
Mhm.
hey, I'm playing this, I'm looking through the eyes of this character experiencing this world, and who's been here for, I don't know how long. Which is another thing I really like too, is that it kind of goes back to the exposition thing I was talking about, is that this person has clearly been here for some time. We don't know how long, really. I mean, were they born here, like you said? Were they put here? So there's always that opportunity as a writer or a storyteller in general that I'm going to drop these little hints of what things are like. And I didn't really get that to any degree that it felt like all of my questions were answered, which I really liked. But however, I can know how someone might find that off-putting, because so many, let's call them mainstream readers, like to have all of the answers, right? They like to have everything served up to them on a silver platter. So sorry, I know that was a really long answer, but
no, that's good. Yeah. Because I mean, that's the thing, because going forward with the series, as I write more, I do want to say that probably about maybe like 90% of the sort of questions will be answered eventually. It's not going to be a complete unknown. There are obviously going to be things in there that I think some things need to remain a mystery. Just to, it's creepy. It's it adds mystery, and it like I said before, I don't want to rob the chance, for somebody to come up with their own headcanon for what's going on, their own theories as to why this happened. Famously, what's in the box at the end of 7? Not at the end of 7. Pulp Fiction. You never actually know what's in it.
I gotcha.
It's some things I think need to remain a mystery. But I'm not. I don't think. I think the shtick would get quite old if a few sort of books in, a few potentially games in, or something that it just remains a mystery. I think it would just sort of lose its act pretty quickly. And as you say, it works well in this because it's a short story. I've sort of said what I needed to say with it, and the sort of this story sort of closed in a sense. It sort of doesn't need a sequel necessarily, but then the universe it's built in kind of does, if that makes sense. The story is sort of its own self-contained story, but the universe definitely needs expanding. And I was quite surprised actually that when I did finish it, that not a lot was actually mentioned about the sort of lore of the world that it's set in. I don't think I ever mentioned the CEA once, which is like the biggest part of the world. It's a massive part of the lore, and I don't think I ever mentioned it once in White Mice. And that's not a problem. Obviously, I can touch on it later on. Actually, no, the CEA is mentioned, but it's sort of, I think, in passing when 1807's walking through the halls and sees all the posters of ZTF cures cancer, cures this disease, and I think it's mentioned there that the CEA have something to do with it. So yeah, there's so much potential there, and it'd just be such a waste to not actually like fully go into it. So I guess I suppose another question for you.
Real quick, hold that
go for it. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, do you worry that answering these questions, like you mentioned, 90% of these questions will be answered, more or less, give or take. Do you worry that sometimes the mystique of what you've created will be lost? Because I think that's one thing that I would often worry about, especially the way the story is framed, is that it's clearly a very tight POV experiential thing that this character is going through, with all of these hints and stuff. And sometimes the unsaid is really what sticks with us, as consumers of stories. So expanding upon this with a novel, as you mentioned, is there any fear in your mind that maybe it will lose its luster a little bit when people get the answers?
I guess that would be the last 10% or so.
Okay.
That would remain for that, for that purpose. Because, and the thing is as well, which I think a lot of sort of horror writers might, I mean, I'm no expert at all, I'm a brand new author and everything, it's just, I just feel that sometimes the things that scare me the most tend to be like when my imagination runs wild. So, it's almost like the less you say, sort of the better, less is more, because your brain's going to go to what you think is the most scary. It's sort of being afraid of the dark. You start imagining what you would find scary in the dark. So to just have it all sort of, as you say, just told, it loses its to sort of have a perfect example. How was it? Signs, M. Night Shyamalan, one of his earliest ones. For the entire film, I found that there's no like necessarily jump scares or anything like that, and it's quite a sort of slow build up. But it does what I love in media the most, where sort of it goes in there, it tells one story, it tells it well, and it gets out. It doesn't sort of overstate. But for the entire time, it's just incredibly creepy. You know, like you've got Mel Gibson's daughter in the bed, sort of looking outside the window. Said, "Oh, there's a monster in my bed," and he goes in there. There's a monster on the roof, and you know he goes in there thinking, "Oh, it's just a kid, like you know, it's being scared of whatever." And when the camera pans to the alien being on the roof, it's terrifying. It's not like a jump scare, but it's terrifying. Yeah. And that sort of mystery the entire time is really scary, all the way up until the alien is shown at the end. Then it completely loses that fear factor, because I'm no longer thinking of an alien that I would find terrifying or demon or you know whatever it is. The writers told me what it is, and that's it. That's what it is now. It's you know it's no longer you know that scary monster that I would find scary. It's the writers' one, and that's it. In terms of the things, so when it comes to like emotional pull of the story, or like say trying to scare the reader, trying to get them to think a certain way, the sort of emotional bits, that's that 10% I was talking about. That's that bit that remains a mystery. When it comes to like who ZTF are, who the CEA are, how they came to be in there, you know, who 1807 is, you know, things like that, I feel would be explained. And I think it's going to be satisfying when it does, to be honest, once, you know, get through some more lore dumps in the future.
Nice. I have to ask too. So I read a book that really it was pivotal to me, in terms of structuring a novel or whatever you want to call this. But it was Knock 'Em Stiff by Donald Ray Pollock. It's a book I talk about often because it's kind of a short story collection, but kind of not. So it's about 200 or so odd pages. It all takes place within a single location, but every story is a different almost vignette of characters that all exist around each other in a way. And the main, one of the main character, well, I shouldn't say the main character, but the character we're introduced to at the beginning is a boy, and at the very end, the final story is him as a man. But peppered throughout that are all of these vignettes, like I said, about characters that maybe were just peripheral characters in story 2. And now they're the heroes of their story. And so I when I was reading this too, I was thinking like, that would be a cool format for a longer form thing where they're still like White Mice length-ish, you know? But then it doesn't feel just like a short story collection. It feels like all of these things are intertwined and all going on around each other in such a way that feels kind of like a novel, but also you're not sort of trapped into creating this cohesive throughput, like a narrative, like from beginning to end. But
yeah, and I suppose that's kind of my plan in a way, in the sense that you know it's probably going to end up being, you know, novels, short stories, a bit of a blend, but there's never going to be one novel, one novella, one short story that's going to have like a direct sequel. They're all going to be their own standalone stories within the universe, basically. So it is telling a story, like an overarching story, but not necessarily like you know, a point A to point B kind of overarching story, if that makes sense. Yeah. So you know, you can pick up any one of them and get a glimpse into the world, but you know, the more you read and the more invested you are, you will pick up more of the overarching story, jumping around different timelines and, you know, different characters and things like that, and different perspectives as well. I mean, one of the same bit of feedback I always got when talking about sequels for White Mice is, well, I'll ask you the question first before I give you the common answer. But what sort of perspective, or if there was another book set in the White Mice universe, what is it you would want to see? What perspective would you want to see? What sort of story would you like to would you like to follow, if that makes sense?
You mean like perhaps is it somebody else in the same facility, or is it somebody else that maybe is higher up that is,
That's what I mean. Like what
yeah, I think
like
that'd
what
be
would
cool.
you yeah.
I mean, granted, I would like another perspective, I think, from someone who's maybe outside of the system, not the system, I should say, but not like a subject or guest or patient or whatever you refer to them as. But so for instance, the Southern Reach trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer is one of my favorite series of all time. Book one is about somebody in this Area X, let's call it. Basically, there was like an alien, there was some kind of event that completely changed the world, at least a certain part of it. And then in book two, it's about kind of a bureaucratic person who is in the system, like the organization that sent this expedition out. So I thought it was a really cool way to, so for instance, like these bug-eyed guards you have, right? Like, I think that would be cool to see a story from their POV, or somebody, like, it doesn't even have to be like a major player, meaning like, the CEO or whoever these people are that are the C-suite people who are running this thing, but like just another ordinary person who maybe is in the trenches with these people, but also like on the other side of the equation, on the other side of the glass, you might say. I think that would be
Okay, yeah.
that would be interesting.
Yeah, that's very similar to the sort of the other feedback I got. And usually people say I want a story from the lab coat's perspective, from the scientist perspective.
Yeah.
The ones actually performing the things. That's what a lot of people want. That's the main feedback I've got. Yeah, they're very similar to from the guard's perspective as well. And I suppose it's probably taken a lot more inspiration than I thought from like the Oddworld games, in the sense that there's always a different character, a different species that you follow in each game. I really like that idea of you go in. So we followed the test subject 1807 for his story. And, you may have another story. Again, it's a unique story in the sense that I suppose the story could almost be told in another setting completely, if you know what I mean. So it's still in the same universe, but the same story could be told in a fantasy world, or, so the story is a standalone thing on its own. But like a perspective from a guard's perspective, or a lab coat's perspective, or maybe somebody higher up, or maybe somebody who lives outside of ZTF who doesn't know about it, or hears rumors about it, or or lives deep within the CEA, or something like that. So and to me I just find that fun, because I tend to lose focus or get bored of things very easily. It's hard for me to maintain my attention. So it's so to be able to be like, right, I'm done with that story. It's the same universe, for fans of the other one will still like it, and it's a world that I'm really close to and I've built up for a decade. But I'm going to tell a completely different story, of a completely different perspective, maybe even a different, maybe it's a third person past tense, maybe it's, in the form of logs on a computer or something, just completely change it up every time. That's exactly how I'd approach it.
Yeah, I think it lends an authenticity to the world and the story too, and it kind of goes back to everyone is the hero of their own story, right? So we automatically think that 807 is a victim, right? Maybe is, maybe isn't. We don't know. What does that look like to somebody else, on the other side of the glass, whether it be a lab coat, whether it be one of these guards or whoever it might be. And to me, that really makes a world richer, because again, as people, we're always trying to label people as the hero or the villain. And like you said, that's not what you're about with your stories. And so I think that really further cements that concept where nobody's the good guy or the bad guy. Like, they're just, it depends on interpretation, I guess, but it's just, this is what this person's doing because they have their own problems. And there's so many great ways to humanize these people that would just, again, just make the entire thing richer. So yeah, looking forward to it. I think that'd be cool.
Yeah, it'll always be told as a sort of fly on the wall, sort of just like you're looking in on, the events unfolding. And you never, it's never going to be said, this person's good, this person's bad. It's always going to be told just as a matter of fact, this is what's happening right now. The reader's smart enough to figure out, what's going on, and, whether they agree with them or not. But if I've got the reader thinking, that's a bit, you know, yeah, I mean, so I suppose it's sort of a spoiler, but it is mentioned in the warning on the book that it's in there. But I'd like to talk about the cannibalism scene. So, you know, in that scene, I mean, would you say that 1807 is, I suppose, necessarily crossed the boundary, or do you think they're an evil person? Do you know? I mean, that's the sort of thing I want to sort of like grapple with. I mean, what are your thoughts on that scene in general?
Yeah, I think again that to me was the scene that really cemented in the idea that, like you said, it's about perspective and it's about what we're used to, right? So, yes, for me, eating somebody, the world I live in and the time I live in, going out and eating somebody is, you know, it's a terrible, yeah, it's a terrible thing to do. But like, that's again, another thing I really liked is that you're thinking like, oh, you're thinking about perspective and you're thinking like, is this bad what this guy is doing? Is this just a means for survival? Is this just a day in the life? Like, no big deal. And so those moments kind of give me pause to think about these things because they're challenging what I think, you know, in the world I live in, how people would view that. But no, I wasn't shocked or taken aback because it got me thinking more about, okay, interesting. I can see why this would make sense in this world, you know, with this character.
Yeah.
But yeah,
and I suppose if you're in that situation, would you do that? You know, it's you know,
yeah. And that's what I think that's what gives this story so much depth is that you're not just telling this straightforward story. I mean, it feels like it on the surface that you're just experiencing this weird place going, you know, through the eyes of this person, but also there's these moments where you're able to reflect on these events that are so different. Granted, it could be a shared experience like cannibalism that we would know what it's like here, but in the context of that world and that person's experience, it's different. It's in a different context.
Yeah.
So, yeah, again, I think that's a great, and it seems like in our conversation that was your intention is to not only not paint people as heroes and villains, but also do you think, what are ethics? You know, like what is morality? You know, in this situation?
In a strange way, it's to paint them as human.
Yeah.
In the most inhumane and inhuman way. Like, I mean, he's doing something that's clearly you would call inhumane. It's not, you know, it's unhuman. But in the exact same token, it's actually very human. You know, it's clearly a broken individual. He's been worn down, and someone else in that situation who's grown up with that might just do that. It's very human. You know, we make mistakes. That's sort of what makes us, well, you know, human. It's totally. You know, we make mistakes all the time, and we do things bad that we think are good. Some people learn from it. Some people don't learn from things. But you know, it's it's humanism without the humanity. I don't know if I'm making sense there, but yeah,
no,
like it's
Go ahead.
when they're really pushed down to the bottom, you know, when you, because 1807 really is pushed down to like almost primal levels of an existence, you know. Ironically, except for the part where he needs to make a choice, as you said earlier, you know, that's like the first nugget of, oh, hang on a sec, I've got a bit of free will here. You know, I'm a person. I'm not just a, you know, at the end of the day, even though they're, you might have to cut that bit. I've lost it.
No worries, man. I've been the same way. Sometimes when I'm rattling on about an answer, I'm like, where
the train of thought just went there. Where am I going with this?
No, it's good.
Like my writing, I suppose.
No, it's awesome. I think you're on the right track. I think you're exploring cool things thematically with just asking these larger questions, but in small moments. And I think that's because we often, one of my biggest complaints with people when they are reading a book or watching a movie, like maybe it's something I really enjoyed, and they're criticizing the decisions of players. So in the case of your story, eating somebody else, right? They often think of it in the context of who they are and their situation. Like the classic example is in horror movies when they're being chased by the axe murderer and somebody trips on a tree root and falls.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh my God, everyone's rolling their eyes and this is so stupid. And why did they go in this door? Why would you go in that house because of X, Y, and Z? It's like, nobody is thinking that way when they're being chased, right? You don't have you don't have this mindset where you're analyzing okay, well, if I do that, then this is going to happen. If I do that, this is going to happen. All my motor skills are perfect. Like I'm going to just jet sprint over this stuff, not be, hindered whatsoever. And so even it's funny because like I've even made fun of this myself too. Where and this is probably, I would say this is a fair criticism, I think anyway, but the whole Wile E. Coyote thing where or the Looney Tunes where if something is falling, somebody keeps running, in the direction of it versus like just turn right or turn left. And I often think like, I don't know, like would somebody in that situation just when it's a life and death thing, would they lose all sense of logic and just keep running that way? But so I think I often think of that as far as like always in the context of the situation the character is in, the time period, the environment, whatever it is. Like that's what people should really be considering, not their comfy position on the couch where they have all the food they want and the shelter they want. So I go ahead.
In a similar point to that, you mentioned, they're running away from the axe murderer and they trip on the tree branch. Everyone goes, oh, it's very, very, sort of it's always really annoyed me. And I know it shouldn't because it's just the medium that it is of storytelling is when, say you'll be watching a show or reading a book and a character does something. It could be sort of really, really mundane, but you just know at some point later on in the story, that little thing's going to come back and it's either going to save the day or basically nothing that happens in the story. And I know it's a bit of a taboo to like everything that happened that you write should have something to progress the story forward. But for some reason, it's a bit of a bugbear to me. Like sometimes somebody might just need to sneeze. And there's no explanation for it. And I'm probably in a massive minority there. But honestly, I just find that it like, one, I just think it's funny. Two, I feel like it just adds a bit of realism. There's even a few points in White Mice where I've done something like that and it's just never expanded on. It just happened. And it's like, again, it sort of goes back to that whole, life's not this grand master plot thing. I want you to feel like you are just watching these things happen, and I really want the reader to be drawn into that. So I don't know. There's going to be lots of sneezing from my characters or odd things that are just going to happen, and hopefully it gets a chuckle out of some people. Yeah. But it's going to
become Easter eggs for you. Like the readers will look for it. They're like, okay, what kind of pointless mannerism is he going to throw in this time?
Yeah, it's not building the character. It's got nothing to do with the plot. They just do it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great example, and I think it's one of those things that just like anything in writing that it's all about proportion. Because sometimes I'll read a book and I'll see authors doing stuff for effect, but then it's like done too often to where you're like, okay, I see what you're doing, but I feel like you're putting too much attention on it. But still, again,
you're laying it on too thick. Yeah.
That's not just for what you're saying. That's for literally anything in writing, phrases, actions, like whatever, even if they're sort of intentional regarding like a character quirk or something. But I think it's great, like when it makes sense or when it feels right. Because again, I keep saying this, but it did feel the story. It felt like an authentic experience for someone living in this, to my best ability of understanding the situation and the world. It felt authentic. I never felt taken out of the fiction, so to speak, by something.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Because I think that often happens. Like I've read plenty of books where I'm literally taken out of the fiction because I'm like, this is just absolutely unbelievable to me. Even when I think about it in the context of the character who is experiencing it or performing it or whatever it might be. So
yeah, if 1807 started humming a song to himself, like out of nowhere, I get exactly what you mean. Yeah.
But I mean, that could be cool.
But again, that's the
where do you learn the song? Wait, is it like a childhood song? Like what? You start asking questions. when you don't
Yeah.
explain it. But yeah, it's a cool idea. I've never, I don't think I've ever talked to anybody who's expressed that, meaning like I'm adding these things to add authenticity to a story or an experience versus just everything must be intentional.
And
That's
and
what I
also
think about.
adding it because it doesn't have a purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah, which for some reason is a big thing for me. I don't know why, but I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Maybe that'll become my shtick. But yeah, there's just something about just the mundane, or just I don't know, the monotonousy of just simple things that might never lead anywhere, and people are going to get frustrated with that maybe. And don't get me wrong, I don't think it's laid on too thick in White Mice. There is a story there. You know, we're talking as if it's like, you know, it's just like a mess that never goes anywhere. But but you know, I like that sort of sprinkled in. To me, that just makes it unique.
Well, not only that,
it's just the sort of story I want to tell. Yeah,
but if you think about it, again, in the context of this story, right? This person is experiencing a very monotonous life. It seems to be anyway. You have moments where looking at the ceiling in the room or at the floor or things that are very monotonous or mundane, that you decided to put in there. Because to me, even though you may feel like, oh, this is a pointless act, it matters to this person because they're almost living life in slow motion to a degree. Because we have less distractions and places to go and options, so to speak. And we have fewer options, let's say. Like a prisoner, right? They're in their cell and they're just staring at their feet for 8 hours a day or something like that.
Yeah, the mundane becomes extraordinary.
Exactly. And so I think you capture that well. And so even though a lot of readers out there might feel like, well, what? This feels like pointless. It's like, no. It's totally intentional. And it feels right.
And I suppose those little bits needed to be in the story to make the sunrise scene hit a bit harder.
Yeah.
Because something so as simple as that is obviously like a massive emotional high for the character and for the whole story. So, I suppose, without those little mundane bits of looking at the ceiling, looking at the floor, you know, eating the horrible tin food, you know, it obviously adds a lot more color into it when it does happen.
And it's not something that I think it's like it has kind of a literary aspect in it to it in that way, whereas a lot of genre fiction kind of skips over that. Like they don't want to add significance to the mundane when I think there can be a lot of power to it if you pay attention. Granted, that's another subtextual layer that maybe a lot of readers won't pick up on, but some might, right? Or maybe they consume it subconsciously. And then that resonance, like you said, with the sunrise scene and stuff, like it really has more power. They don't know why, but they feel it, you know. And I think a lot of people who don't write, we inherently know story, and we feel when something's wrong. We may not be able to articulate why, or when something's great, but we feel it. And I think that's the coolest thing about storytelling is that we're just so wired for it that even people who don't understand the craft of fiction can still get something out of it, which is really neat.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is the thing. I mean, most things in life happen in those like small moments anyway. Yeah. You know, the mundane. You know, if you think back to, you know, some of your happiest memories that you have, they might not even be that, you know, it's not like, you know, you flying into space or anything like that, or, you know, it's probably something to do with a family member or a friend, or, you know, that night a few of your friends did something incredibly mundane, but it's like it was a night that you always remember. You know, it's those little tiny moments in life, you know, that really do make up, what life is really. And yeah, you know, it's not to say that big things aren't as meaningful, but I think, you know, life's made up of lots of small stuff, and I think
they can have significance, right? And to me, because like you said, that's how people experience stuff. It's very similar to how I'm sure you have had an experience where you haven't listened to a particular song in like decades or many years, and it comes on, you hear it, and it transports you immediately back to
you're straight back. You're
straight back. You're in this. Again, it's never some crazy pivotal moment in my life. It's always like, man, I had that CD. I was going to college at the time. I remember the car. I remember sitting in the car. I remember the parking
Yeah,
lot.
you remember the smell of the car.
It's just the mundane stuff, right? Again, it's not a pivotal moment in terms of like, oh, that's when I graduated. That's when I got married. That's when I got my heart broken, whatever it is. It's like, no, it's just me sitting in my car in the parking lot of my school, you know? So yeah, I think it definitely adds a lot of authenticity to the story and that extra layer that people may not appreciate. They don't know what they're looking for.
Yeah. And I think that ties really, really neatly into about the sequel that I'm writing for White Mice. Actually, is that a lot of what you're going to see, and if you want to hear, as I said earlier, I do have like a little snippet if you wanted to, to hear it.
I'd love to if you don't mind sharing. I'd love
and
to.
Yeah, of course. And it's obviously still a work in progress, but I'd be excited to share it. But a lot of what happens or is going to happen in this book is that it's I use the word mundane a lot, but I want to say like institutional. It's a very methodical, very assembly line sort of thing. And even though the things that the characters are doing is very, it's almost spoken very matter of fact, very like an assembly line, like a factory sort of thing. When you actually take a step back and realize what they're actually talking about is when you're like, wow, this should not be sort of normalized, if you know what I mean. I think I'm over explaining it a little bit, but yeah, that sort of comes back to that sort of same thing. I mean, I have I think I have it up here actually. If you wanted to have a little listen.
I would love to. I'll shut up and let you take it away.
No worries. So it's just a short passage. It's just from sort of the first chapter. So here we go. So, pushing the cart full of mangled body parts and expired test subjects down the long corridor, I notice one of the subjects looking at me. They're dead, of course, but I can't help but feel that they're judging me as I cart them away. I see their eyes in flashes as my vision goes from pitch black to a faint glow as the ceiling lights are spaced out. I wonder what test she was a part of. She has jet black, frizzy hair, the kind of hair that lacked care or sustenance. An arm protrudes from the side of her face, pointing upwards. I'm not sure if it's her arm or someone else's. I guess neither. It belongs to ZTF. At the end of the corridor is a metal shutter door. I park the car and pull the chains, which opens the shutter. Dust from outside sweeps its way into the corridor. The outside is warm. I can feel it, even through my suit. I push the car outside, hitting every crack in the concrete below. I follow a yellow-painted line on the floor. The odd skeletal hand or foot litters the way. I can see the floodlights in the distance, piercing through the smog and dust in the air. I make my way through a cut in the chain-link fence, topped with barbed wire. It brings me to an opening, revealing a megalithic set of floodlights shining down on a pit as far as the eye can see, a massive crater full of corpses. It's hard to estimate the number of bodies in there. The hole goes on for what seems like kilometers, width, depth, and height. A huge crane dangles above, swinging in the wind. It has sharp points on its claws and serrated edges. Lakeen said that this once operated as a giant blender, with razors filling the inner circumference of the hole. If that's true, it hasn't been activated in a long time. I wheel the container to the edge of the pit and press a button on the cart. It slowly raises the container with the bodies and dumps them ungracefully into the pit. I light my torch and scan the area. Nothing hiding in the shadows. All I can hear is the mechanical tick of the cart and my breath inside the hazmat suit. I turn the torch off and look to the towering complex of ZTF. From where I am, it's hard to tell whether I'm in the middle of the facility or on the edge. The smog hides the top of the buildings. For all I know, ZTF is never ending.
Wow, I love it, man. That's great. Nice work. Yeah.
Thank
wow. Super evocative, and obviously a different kind of perspective. So, and I love the, I don't know, the internal kind of monologue of this person going through about their day. And the killer opening, by the way, too.
Thank you.
It's like a cart full of body parts. Like you're not even easing into it. You're going to start right off the bat. That's great. No, that's awesome, man.
Yeah, no, really.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah.
This is the novel, right? This is going to be like, this is
going to be a novel. Yeah.
Novel. Wow. Okay.
This is at the end of chapter 1. So, yeah, you can see, you can see the sort of, just I suppose just another perspective of ZTF. And I think people are really going to enjoy the story. I think the sort of twists and turns, and how it's going to end, will be more satisfying than maybe some people may think 1087's story. But yeah, I'm really hoping people will enjoy it. I think people will enjoy it. I'm excited to write it.
I'm excited to read it, man. Sounds good. So I guess before we stop, like, I mean, you're working on a bunch of stuff. You mentioned a epic fantasy series. You're talking about the sequel to White Mice. What's on your plate right now, first and foremost? Or are you kind of juggling between a few projects?
Yeah, so I've got obviously game design sort of going on, but that's sort of it takes a lot of mental energy when you're sort of programming and working in Unreal. There's a lot, because you're 1 second you're sort of doing music, sound effects, art. You're doing a bit of the story. You're doing you're sort of juggling a lot of bits. So that's really when I'm really in the zone and I need to need to work on that. When it comes to writing, it's mainly flipping between my fantasy novel and this new White Mice sequel. So usually on a day when I'm feeling quite dark and angsty, and I've got that sort of inner 14-year-old angsty me sort of, or I just feel a bit down or something. It's raining outside. I'll put on some creepy music and I'll get writing White Mice. If I'm feeling a bit more uplifted and a bit more, just in the right mood for a fantasy setting, I'll work on the fantasy book basically. And because they're quite a juxtaposition from each other. I actually quite like that, because if I'm starting to get into a writer's block with one, I can move over to the other one. And because it's completely different, for some reason, for me, that just kicks in. I quite like just having more than one project on the go, especially because, because they're so different. And some things I learned from one, say like the more sort of horror or eerie elements from White Mice, I can add into my fantasy novel, and vice versa. If there needs to be a more cheerful bit, not that there's many, I can take that from the fantasy world. I'm not sure if I've actually mentioned anything about the fantasy world at all.
Let's talk about this for the fantasy fans out there.
Yeah, sure. So it's called Echoes of Bakak. I have a YouTube channel, which I've only done a few videos on, and it's basically just sort of lore dumps, like sort of 10-minute videos just going into like lore of things.
Okay.
I think there's a short on there as well, just telling like a small story within the universe. But it's quite tough to sort of get. So it's not set so the universe isn't set on a planet. There's no humans. It's completely outside of this time and space. It's every bit of like plant life, animal life, the civilizations, the like 5,000-year-old history or so is completely like sort of done from scratch. So there might be inspirations from real world cultures, but it's been a long process to build it up to this point. So, in terms of the sort of basics of like the story, instead of getting into the sort of lore and stuff, you follow a diplomat from the Shanai Empire. So this is the problem with sort of like doing almost like a lore dump, is you say a lot of made up words and it's hard to sort of keep up, I always find that with a lot of fantasy, it's like the shkulududu did this to blah, and you're just like, this just means nothing, man. You're just making up words. It's I know that's part of the fun of it, but just choose some normalish names sometimes, but yeah, basically there's a race of Kravisian people, and they're quite new in the land of Bakak, in a sense that they don't reproduce. They're not male or female. They sort of appear into this realm, sort of as they are, sort of as they're going to be. And these are, they appear in like spawning pools, and nobody really knows where they come from, but they're the only race in the whole of Bakak that can tap into what's called the ecosphere. And the ecosphere is like another dimension that lays across the entire of Bakak, and it's sort of a mixture of time, which is why they're the only ones that can do something called time walking. So they can essentially go back in time. So if you imagine the whole of like time as like a book, so what they can do when they time walk is they can go to a specific page in that book, as a metaphor, and go there and live there as if, it's actually, almost like VR, they can actually experience it.
Okay.
But not only that, they can actually take objects back with them. And if they go back to that same spot again, so, you know, example, if they went back to a certain point where there was a tree, a fruit tree, they could pick the fruit off that tree, go into the current time, and have all the fruit with them. They could also go back to that exact same point and the fruit tree will be there again. So you have this empire of abundance where there's no need to farm. There's no need for agriculture. There's no currency. You know, so you follow a Crevision called Kalin, who's a diplomat for the empire. And it all starts when there's a breakaway faction. And the breakaway faction essentially is a far more industrial kind of faction. You know, they farm, they have factories, they don't chant, they don't time walk or anything like that. But yeah, it's, you know, you know, so you follow the diplomat as they go through, you know, their side of the story, but it flips between two perspectives. You have Kalvak, who is a Vulcan, which I think I mentioned like an hour ago or so, who's more of a sort of Viking-y sort of race, you know, and he's a scout, and you know, it's all about sort of how he wants more for his race, and I always find it so hard to get into. I would recommend, like, if anybody's interested in this, like, in this world that I'm just absolutely lost in and really love, then to check out the Echoes of Bakak YouTube channel, because I do have like an introduction to the races on there, and it might just be a bit easier to follow than my sort of ramblings.
I'll link it down below.
And
sure.
And you know, if anybody wants to get hold of me, there's there's the Echoes of Bakak YouTube channel. There's also my website. I'm more than happy, you know, any questions anybody has. I'm always open to, you know, messages or anything, or even feedback. You know, any sort of feedback. You know, and don't be afraid to be harsh either. You know, you learn through, you know, through your critics as well as, you know, people who like your work as well. So, cool. I'll be happy to talk to anyone. And and thanks for having me on the show. You know, I've really had good fun. It's been great.
It's been a great chat.
Yeah, I'd love to come on again sometime. It's it's been good
for sure. Anytime, man. You're always welcome. Next thing you got coming on, or you know, if you have some cool topic to talk about, happy to have you on. So guys out there, I'm gonna link everything down below for all of Dan's stuff, so you can check them out. And yeah, it's been a fascinating conversation, man. And thanks for coming on.
Yeah, the time's flown by.
I know.
Yeah, thanks. I know. Thanks, man. Yeah, really appreciate it.